So of course, so we categorize it into, so we have the guest experience, guest satisfaction, the net promoter score. Then we have the revenue, the onboard, the revenue side, onboard revenue, meaning food and beverage revenue, and any other revenue, being it retail, spa, entertainment, and then we have the cost side. So guest satisfaction, revenue, cost, and then also we do a crew survey, and of course important is also for us crew satisfaction, right? So one thing when you're talking about crew satisfaction is important too, because the crew lives on board too.
You said the POS for cruising is specific to the industry. Tell me
Yeah,
more about that.
we use regular brands, but there are some specialized brands, right? So they just, because, as I said, there's one checkout, 10 days, right? The cruise is longer, so the systems are geared to that. We have to do the closing, financial closing. We don't count, we count also per day the cost, but we do the revenue per cruise.
Hello, welcome to Deep Current by Oceans. I'm your host, Kaylor, and today I'm joined by Dietmar Wertanzl. He's the CEO and president at Anglo-Eastern Leisure Management. Hello, welcome to the show.
Hello, Kaylor. Nice to be here.
Thanks for being here. So, Dietmar, before we dive in, can you tell us about your background and your experience? Was hospitality an industry that you sought, or did it find you somewhere along the way?
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's a good question. Well, it found me when I was in Europe in my teens. I had to make a decision what kind of profession would I like to pursue in my life. And my sister had a friend, and she was a flight attendant at that time, and it was in the 70s. And, I was fascinated. I said to her, "You travel the whole world?" And she said, "Yes." And then I said, "What kind of education do you have?" She said, "I went to hotel management school." And long story short, I went to my parents. I said, "I want to go to hotel management school." And they asked me, "Why is that?" I said, "I want to see the world and travel, and that's a great segue to do so." Little did I know, of course, what I got into in terms of hospitality. But so then I had an opportunity to travel the world, not on airplanes, but once I finished my studies, I worked on cruise ships. At that time, cruise ship was one of the opportunities to work international. I grew up in Austria and studied tourism and hospitality management there first, and got my introduction to the business. And then, of course, I was eager to get out there in the world, and I had an opportunity to go on a cruise ship here in Florida. I came here in the late 70s to Fort Lauderdale. I live now in Miami, so close by, and I do remember the time, and joined my very first cruise ship. But at that time, there were two ships. There were sister ships. One was cruising in the Caribbean, and the other one was getting ready for going 100 days around the world. And then, of course, I said to myself, "Wow, I ended up on the wrong ship." And of course, I made the correction. And the year after, I was on the right ship and did my very first around the world cruise. And then basically I quit, because my ambition was really just to see the world, gain experience. And of course, I was in the hospitality business, wanted to be a hotelier. I had to move to Switzerland. From the ship, I went to Switzerland and did some management training there. The reason why Switzerland, when I grew up, I wanted to be high quality. The Swiss schools, and the way they managed their hotels was always something, a pedigree or a benchmark for high quality management. So I went to Switzerland, did my training there, and had some fabulous mentors. 3 years, 4 years actually, and then after 4 cold Swiss winters, somehow I said to myself, "Well, it would be nice to go maybe back on a cruise ship, or go back in some different climate." And I read in a magazine an opportunity to work on a cruise ship, which I knew the company from my previous work in that industry. And they were looking for a chef de réception, mean front office manager and concierge combined position. I said, "Wow, that's unique." And the minimum age was 25. I just was 25. Of course, they wanted several languages. And put in my application, did anything for 6 months. And then I got a call, and somebody called me, the vice president of hotel operation from San Francisco. It was a Swiss gentleman, of course, interviewed with him in Switzerland. And then I joined again the cruise business from the mountain resort in Switzerland straight to San Francisco and became the very first or one of the very first concierges in the cruise industry. And it was fun too. It was a great experience because, concierge in 1983 was not a regular household name only in certain areas. And in America, it was not the industry, but I had a name tag. It was Dietmar Concierge. And I was supposed to handle all complaints on I was the guy everybody had to go to for anything. So it was a nice icebreaker when I said, "How do you pronounce your name?" And concierge, so it was interesting. It was a great thing for me, great gig, saw the world. The company was the best in the cruise industry at the time, Royal Viking Line. They trained me well, and also I learned two new things. The name was called McKinsey, and marketing, of course, McKinsey. I said, "What is the McKinsey?" Oh, it's the company all our executives came from. And of course, little did we know, they prepped us, they prepared us. We got computer systems. We were really state of the art already, a young team. And 2 years later, they sold the company, right? So that was it. And it was a fabulous experience. And then 2 years later, I became one of the youngest hotel managers in the business. And then I said to myself, look, this industry is interesting. I like it. I can be out there. It's like a floating resort, of course, more complicated or complex, traveling the world, which I loved. And I made a strategic decision. I said, let's stay in the cruise business. But anyway, I grew up with the company. And then 5 years later, towards the end of the 80s, Japanese company, NYK, wanted to build the most luxurious cruise ship in the world. I was lucky. I got chosen to be the first hotel manager. Was part of the team, stayed in Los Angeles, California. We built the ship in Japan, and I think it was maybe one of the best times in my life at the time. We took the ship out, and it was a great new opportunity, and it set new standards in the cruise business from having specialty restaurants to, of course, we defined luxury in terms of space choices and quality. And it was the first ship with 80% of staterooms with balconies. So had a lot of industry firsts and got great publicity. Then in a year later, I got my first opportunity then to moved to the United States permanent as a corporate hotelier, as vice president of hotel operations, again with a fairly new cruise brand called Celebrity Cruises. And I came here into Miami first time and from Los Angeles. Yeah, and then cruise business, fantastic, a little different. The basics are the same, but it's definitely a little bit of everything. You have the guests, the before they join the cruise, during the cruise, and after the cruise. You got to get them there. You got to get everything to the ship from the provisions, from the crew. And it's like a little different than managing resorts or hotels as in a chain. It's more like an interdependent business unit, like a dependent business unit. But from there on, I went back to Crystal Cruises, back to Los Angeles. They built a new ship, and then back to Celebrity. Every time I moved up a little bit the corporate ladder. At the end, I was chief operations officer for Celebrity, senior vice president fleet operations, and then I made a decision to go into the boutique small cruise ship concept like expedition cruising in 2008. And at the time I was a private owner in Seattle. They had 9 ships and they cruised in Alaska. We built a business. We wanted to go more international. We needed new destinations. We also started some river cruising in Europe, so that was exciting. But then the financial crisis hit us, and we had to sell the company. And during that process, I met another gentleman who owned a ship management company, who basically wanted to created a third-party operations company for the technical management on the cruise ship, because you have the technical and the hotel as a floating hotel. And came here back to Miami in 2011, and it's never left the third-party ship management team or sector. And in the meantime, of course, we sold and we bought the company and sold it again. And 3 years ago, this is a new Anglo-Eastern is actually the largest ship manager cruise in the world. Their core business is, cargo ships, tankers, freighters, and they are having about over 700 ships. And then they wanted to get in the cruise business. And they bought out the previous company, and I'm still here as the president and CEO. And yeah, so I mean, I spend most of my time in the cruise ship business, and I still love it. And perhaps we can chat a little bit what is different between land-based and cruise ships. And hospitality is hospitality. But I always was fascinated by the old ocean liners and you know service style and transportation. That connectivity is still something I'm passionate about.
Fascinating. Well, that's quite the journey. Thank you for sharing. And now let's, for a moment, just talk about Anglo-Eastern. Tell us about the size of the operation. How many people? What does the team look like?
So
What are you supporting?
okay, so we're supporting. We had, I mean, we have now we are different. So we do also the technical, but from our side, hospitality, we have about 10 ships right now. So they're different sizes. Some are smaller boutique ships. They are up to 200 passengers, and they go although in the polar regions, which make it very complex for us to support, particularly the logistics in terms of provisioning the ships, even crewing because let's say in Antarctica, Ushuaia, we have to buy everything locally. We have to ship containers to have consistency. So that's one operation. So we have about, I would say, 1,100 crew members. The ships on and off in a pool right now. The ships vary. We have some 1,000 passenger ships. We also operate on the technical side bigger ones, but our core is really boutique. The ship management within the cruise industry is about a 10% market share. So, and we have also competitors in the business, like you have third-party hotel managers in the hotel business here in the States. So we operate those ships. We also do some. We have another segment where we just do a catering operations on some off-rig accommodation vessels. So we're gonna have 12 of those where we provide the entire catering for everybody. So everything which is floating in hospitality, we try to get the foothold. We don't do river cruising in Europe, although it's a big market nowadays. But we are focused on cruise ships. So I would say the average size is about 1,000 passengers, so 500 rooms, so, what you can say. And that's considered the smaller ships. And most of those are privately owned or some owned corporations. And yeah, so the average crew members on board the ships are around, let's say, 150 to 500 on those ships. And, they stay on board the ship. They have a sailing period. They work 7 days a week. On a ship is different too, because so they have sailing periods from 4 months to 6 months to three in different seasons depending on the ranks. And the biggest thing is, as I said, is that we have to do everything here in the head office for them because once the let's say the person or the crew member is on vacation, we need to plan that and make sure that everybody's on the ship really operates according to the standards and the SOPs. So it is an interesting operation that way.
Mhm. That is massively interesting, and it's a massive operation as well. Now, help me wrap my head around what leading and being on top of an operation of that scale looks like. I mean, what does your day to day even look like? Or, let's say week to week. What are you spending most of
Yeah,
your time?
because the cruise it's also you have a captive audience. So the average length of a cruise is about 10 days. So the guests come on board for 10 days. So it's really a resort type of operation. It's not like a business hotel where the average night is 1 or 2 nights. So it's about 10 days. Some are longer, some are shorter. So then you have an embarkation port and so check in and check out. So but they're not at the same place, or can be at the same too. Can be back to the same place like in Ushuaia. There's no other places, but normally in Europe, or you could be starting in Barcelona, end up in Rome, or vice versa. So then, the biggest day is, of course, and the biggest thing is also on that day, if you have 1,000 passenger ship or even a 3,000 passenger ship, so everybody leaves, all the guests check in at the same time in the morning. I mean, sorry, check out in the morning. And then at 2, 3 o'clock, the new guests come in the afternoon. So at one day, you can have a turnaround of 5,000 people or on the huge, large mega ships, even more. So in Miami, there are 10 ships like this. So that is a big operation. That's like Las Vegas at sea. So in order to do that, then they come in by plane. Some of them spend the night before. So you have all the immigrations, the visas, the documentation, all of that stuff is one side. And then they come on board, the time difference, it's all over the world, basically. And then at the same token, we gotta provision the ship that day. We call it provision. You gotta get everything on board for the cruise. because the main produce, fresh produce, everything is done that day on embarkation day, as we call it, a check-in day. And then also you might have crew turnaround. So sometimes when a crew member comes on board, we don't have any extra beds for that. So when this ship is built, most of them, nobody plans on extra space because, money and square footage go hand in hand. So also a crew member comes on board, he gets his uniform, he flies in the day before, and then in the evening he has to serve dinner. So those are the challenges we face all the time because it is a unit. Once it leaves the port, it's a little village by itself out there in the ocean.
Mm-hmm. And then how do you stay on top of everything? Like what are you spending most of your time behind the desk? Are you spending most of your time on the field talking to
Yeah,
your
that's
leaders?
that's a good. Well, for me, in my position, of course, I have a commercial responsibility, getting new business. Right? I mean, the commercial side get the contracts, right? I mean, that's number one, the top line. And number two, of course, we have a framework, right? The organization, we have systems. We have established inventory systems, POS, specifically for the cruise industry. And without those systems, we couldn't help. And of course, in the meantime, the big word AI and all of this comes in. So, and then I mean, I have a team, of course. I have, like any other organization, I have a vice presidents and senior vice presidents, helping me hold the operations side. And of course, we call it operations support, who is the logistics, the provisioning side. And then the big thing is always in our business, the people business, human resources, finding the right people, attracting the right people, retain them, get them on board, train them, develop them, and retain them. In HR, I think most of them, madam, of course, then I have the legal, the contracts, planning. I'm spend a lot of time also with clients because we have all these the clients as a contract. And of course, how I manage is really, I use the dashboard system. I use a balanced scorecard. I have KPI. We have KPIs, and I review them rigorously every month. Of course, we do also every week. We have a management meeting where we look at the key KPIs, key performance indicators. Where are we? I look at it like a pilot. I gotta monitor my dashboard, right? Do I have enough fuel? And of course, it's automatic or not, but the dashboard's telling me, is it green, is it yellow, is it red?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I manage. And of course, I prefer to be obviously in green, but the yellow is already, for me, as soon as we go into yellow, then we need to come up with a corrective action plan. And,
Mm-hmm.
my management style, I don't like to react. I like to anticipate. And, the more, but, life is, of course, there are certain things, you can control. What we can control, we need to control and anticipate. But of course, the big macro issues you can't control, you can only react, right, and adjust.
Mm-hmm.
So, but whatever we can control, we need to be ahead of, look forward. And in our business, in the cruise business, we are 18 months ahead. We need to plan the port, the itineraries, the crew. But that's the biggest thing. Even sales marketing, needs to be out there 18 months. Where do we go, right, to get the space in the pier? Because the cruising is growing too. Certain ports are congested and you got to get your slots. So itinerary planning is crucial. Where the ship's going to be, the deployment, we call it. So, but most of the time, yeah, I do a little bit of everything. I think at the end, the biggest thing is still the people side of it, finding the right people for the right time at the right price at the right job and keep them, and make them, embrace our culture and execute the culture and become role models in that culture. So that is still the biggest thing in hospitality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're totally right. But help me learn more about what you just described, the dashboards, the green, the yellow, the red. What and you don't have to bring up everything, but give me a few examples. What are some things that you can tell in real time? What are some other KPIs or metrics that you have to wait for reports or a certain cadence? What is what and what are you prioritizing?
So of course, so we categorize it into so we have the guest experience, guest satisfaction, the net promoter score. Then we have the revenue, the onboard, the revenue side, onboard revenue, meaning food and beverage revenue, and any other revenue, being it retail, spa, entertainment, and then we have the cost side. So guest satisfaction, revenue, cost, and then also we do a crew survey, and of course, important is also for us crew satisfaction, right? So one thing when you talk about crew satisfaction is important too, because the crew lives on board too. They spend their work time, free time, and on board the ship, and we need to manage their issues as well. Their relationship, they don't want to be, and they work there, and they eat there, and the food, 30 different nationalities, and so that is a big thing for us as well. And yeah, so the focus, of course, the first thing is, and the balanced scorecard. The idea is, of course, if let's say the food cost is low, but then the guest satisfaction is also low. The food cost is high and the guest satisfaction is low, not a good thing. So so that the idea with the balanced scorecard is like this. If when you have a popular manager on board the ship or general manager, that the crew is very happy, but the cost is normally not where it's supposed to be, for example, right? Or you have the guest ratings low, the crew ratings higher, and then on the other hand, you have the crew morale low, but the costs are under control and the guests are under control. So even more controlled environment, so balance. That's what what I look for, right? Of course, we gotta be on our cost side, and whatever reasons, the outside, as I said, if it's not controllable, we have a logistic, a container didn't make it, we have flight delays. Like now, we had a big scenario with the Iran war. We had all the crew tickets doubled, tripled actually just for March because all the flights, and we had of course crew activities, so that was not in the budget. So we had of course an enormous cost overrun, but it was not our making, but we just had to react to the market because unfortunately we have a lot of Asian crew and most of them had to fly via Doha and Dubai. That was our regular route. That didn't exist in March, so it's stabilizing now. But of course, we took the hit. Those are things which always happen. So in order for as a leader, got to look at. So first of all, we got to set the standard, right? So every year we use the ISO International Standard Organization. We look at our history. We always like to little stretch the goals every year. So we keep getting better and continuous improvement. That's also one of our mission. You cannot, you can't go down. You can always, still the plane got to still go up on a higher altitude. That's your objective. And then, once you do that and focus on it, your results are better immediately, 30%. So things which don't get measured don't get done.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I totally agree. Tell me then, Dietmar, what is one part of your operation now that you're very satisfied with? Something that you figured out or that your team has figured out that is working as intended and maybe even better than that?
Yeah, most of the nice thing is when we read the comments, we also do a guest survey at the end of the cruise, and the guests, depending where they come from, we have Chinese guests, American, mostly Americans, but there we get a guest survey, and the nice thing is always that the crew, they talk about the attitude of the crew, that, they're always friendly. Any request you give them, there's never a no, and we teach them, so they really they get out of the way to please every request of the guest, as whatever is in their way to do it on board the ship. There are limitations, but the first thing is, that we found a good culture, the service, the friendliness of the crew, everybody when they come on board, when they see a guest in the corridor, good morning, how are you, sir? And then of course we try to train them to get their names and all of this. And I think that I'm proud of that, or happy to see that. The food is good too, but food is always a little bit more challenging because that is already different flavors, different tastes, but we got that pretty much, but that is always, as I said, challenging. I say the service culture we have achieved is our product strength or differentiator as a brand.
Excellent. On the flip side, what is the hardest part of your job today that somebody that is not in this industry, maybe even within hospitality, but not in cruises specifically, that somebody like that might not appreciate?
Yeah, I just, it's a very complex industry, so you need somebody who is also global, that has a global perspective, global understanding, because it's a total global business. Geographically, you need to know everything. And I realized that when we in corporate, this business, we have corporate, you gotta know what's going on the ships. Ideally, your career path should go through the ship. That you know how a ship operates because it's uniquely 7 days a week. Who does what? How does it work? If you come into the industry, the learning curve is very steep, particularly if you have somebody, even a purchasing agent, or an HR person. They don't know that most of the ports are internationally, the flights. So it's also a tourism slash hospitality job. But I think that's what we're struggling, and the challenges we are here in the United States, right? Our headquarters is here in Miami. And then we have most of the crew members are from, as I said, 30 different nationalities. And sometimes it's a little bit difficult for us to get them here and, their career to do in the United States. So like I did, the career path first from the unit into the corporate office is the ideal career path. And we do see people, working in not generally in the cruise industry, not only with us, but if they don't have the previous exposure of the operation as such, the hotel operation or any of it, anything to do is that the learning curve is just uh, difficult to manage.
Hmm. I could totally see that happening. So, Dietmar, there are many challenges that hospitality is facing right now. Like we could talk about many of them. For example, a big one is that it's estimated that hotels and hospitality companies lose or are not capturing between 10 to 20% of ancillary revenue. A cruise is different. I mean, in a cruise, you said it's kind of a captive audience, right? They are in the cruise. They are, I don't want to say forced because it's a decision that they made, but they are leveraging everything that the cruise has to offer, restaurants and spas and all of these things that you're offering them. So in that specific and particular situation, how do you maximize how much revenue you can capture from that audience?
Yeah, I mean the revenue of what we do, we take a history, we call it a per person per day spent, right? So from the cost side, that's how we manage the cost side, also the revenue. So we make some calculations. And then we have different profit centers, like, the spa, as I said, the bars, of course, the big, the retail. I mean, it varies, different nationalities too, with, different mindset, different product ideas. So, but we use an average, even per demographics, where the guests come from. And so that will we measure and historical data. But again, these are just benchmarks or wannabe, but, of course, the marketing on board the ship too, because as I said, you have a captive audience, but we do compete in retail and with the land-based, duty-free shops or, out there and the jewelry, particularly the Caribbean, they get some duty-free exemptions, which we can't offer. But there are keys on board the ship, so particularly the beverage revenue. So, we know when the guests come, the pre-dinner and after dinner nightlife or before dinner, those are windows of opportunity, and then we need to really go after it and also, plan the operation accordingly and staff it and then turnover. That's where we make our money.
Mhm.
But I want to go back what you said before, that we are the biggest challenge in hospitality is today. I mean, in our business, look, the sourcing markets for the crew have shifted in the, it started out, say, 60s, 70s, 80s was all Europe. Then it became 90s, 2000, Eastern Europe. Now then it became worldwide. And now it's 90% from Asia. And one thing I think as a competitive advantage we have is that on board the ship, we don't need any work permit. The people need to have a traveling visa, and medical, but I mean, there are Schengen visas, and you need a crew visa for the United States if you travel in and out, and to join the ship. But those are the minimum requirements. So you don't need to work with. So that basically we have a global footprint or a framework for us to hire. But we have seen now that service businesses in the Western world, or Europe, or even South America, some countries are better than others. And the ships are, used to be attractive, but now, people of course, they can save money. I think one of our biggest thing also is in the cruise business is that, when you're on board the ship, you don't need a car, you don't need an apartment, everything is taken care of. You eat, it's all included, right? So you can save money. Well, you can always go out and go in the casino in port, but you know what I mean? That the idea is you get a cash advantage in your life. So you spend 2 years on the ship, you go home, you have some cash, right, and do something and go back. So those are the things we try to sell. But it's 90% of our crew is now from Asia.
Mhm.
And Asia is still a big market. We're talking now with Indonesia, India, that's 1.6 billion people right there, and Philippines, that's what we noticed. That's where the people are. They still come with a natural hospitality attitude. Of course, the language barriers are there too. English is our, official safety and service language. So, but in general, the challenge we have in hospitality is, this convenience economy took, as you said, a lot, double digit employees away from us. I mean, they have more freedom. They, from Uber driver to deliveries and everything is electronics. So hospitality, yeah. I mean, it comes to staffing. Same in the cruise ship business. Where do we find all the new people? We're still growing, as an industry, and that is a general big challenge for hospitality. And find the right people, attitude. We always used to say we hire for attitude first and then we train. I think that hasn't changed yet. And then next thing is then if you don't have the right attitude, can you train attitude? Or is it given to you as a DNA?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's an excellent point because you're right. This is another big challenge of the hospitality industry as a whole is staffing. I mean, the last I saw numbers at around 70 to 80% churn year on year. I don't know if it's the case for cruise industries, but that's kind of the global metric right now. So definitely keeping your staff sane, I would say, is critical to maintaining a successful operation. What did you say?
Yeah, no, and the cruise ship is the stories, and for myself and what I hear is, of course, it's a different work environment. If we go on board the ship and it's rough sea and you get seasick and top of it is the first week. But then many of our crew members, when I talked to them, they were ready to leave, But the good news is some when the ship goes out, they cannot leave, immediately because we have the passport. So if they don't do anything wrong or anything, and then we coach them, and then I say out of 10, 7 turn, they want to leave because of and then after 1 week they love it, or 2 weeks, okay, they say I stay, but you gotta, survive the first invitation to go home or reject it, So, but it's good coaching. I think we learned it over the years and doing that. But yeah, no, I mean, the turnover for us is not as bad. People come back, but again, it's a different sourcing market geographically. And, so these people, they support their families. Most of them, as I said, they come for cash. They want to work and send the cash back to support, their family at home, and that's the number one motivation for that. It's a good work environment, as I said. It's nice. You travel, you the quality. We have all different restaurants. It's a high quality. It's a good experience for everybody. I mean, the difference also work on a cruise ship. If everybody depends on you. Because if you're sick or we don't have anybody, we have no shadow or no extra crew members on board. So you learn to be relied on being dependable. So it builds character.
Hmm. Totally. So, Dietmar, let's talk a little bit more about the specifics. I want to make sure that I get that experience from you as well because you have such a unique profile. And you mentioned something earlier. So let me start there. I'm always fascinated by the tools that leaders use in hospitality to make sure that they manage an operation that is highly human. And you still have to make decisions behind a computer sometimes. You said the POS for cruising is specific to the industry. Tell me
Yeah,
more about that.
I
What's
mean, we
unique?
use regular brands, but there are some specialized brands, right? So they just so because as I said, there's one checkout, 10 days, right? The cruise is longer, so the systems are geared to that. We have to do the closing, financial closing. We don't count we count also per day the cost, but we do the revenue per cruise.
Mhm.
Like 10 days. So then we still report monthly, quarterly, and then, yearly. But it's just set up that way because of the circumstances. But in the end of the day, the systems, they're all adaptable and they do that. And then the inventory system is big too because, the ordering on board the ship, one challenge we have is the ship, when they cross, they go from continent to continent. We have limited storage space on board. And there's also safety regulations. You cannot store anything in a corridor. It's like an emergency exit, like in an airplane, limited storage. So the quantities and the turnover, of course, is also cost the container. So the logistic side of it is actually, you got to be an expert. You got to really understand that, to do it well. And that is also, I say, big challenge is the logistics and the provisioning of the ships, on a global scale. Sometimes, we used to do cruises with some small expedition ship in the South Pacific, and when they did the itinerary, the deployment of the ship, they forgot that the ship needs to be resupplied. With Raspberry was a high-end cruise line, but whoever did the itinerary, we took it over, and then we had to manage. We couldn't even fly anything because there were no airstrips anywhere. So then, and locally there's nothing available in the small places. So there are challenges. So
Mhm. What's
but
the
we
cost
learn.
of something like that? Like what's the cost? Is it mostly money, time? Can you quantify the impact of
Oh, they can be in the hundreds of thousands, a plane, like, you have to charter a plane, last minute, that's $100,000 just to charter, depends on and then cargo depends on the size, and then, yeah, or you go to Japan, I mean, Japan is, if you have to do local purchases in Japan, it's just triple the cost, right?
Mm,
So we
okay.
we learned over the years, geographically, the budgets are also based on geographic locations and local sourcing, local because, fresh produce, fish, salad produce, eggs, dairy, can only buy locally. And also the quality of the five, if you run a five-star operation at sea is also equal to a five-star, the operational and land-based resort. Of course, not everything is fresh, but it gotta be of the highest quality, particular seafood and fresh berries and so those are the challenges depending what product. We have also lower level operations too, but as soon as you make a mistake, or the only remedy is air freight, and that costs money.
So let me get this straight. This is incredible. So you're resupplying along the route of the
Yes,
cruise
yes.
different sets of
Mm.
materials and supplies and
Mostly fresh, that lasted long. The idea is, because in the smaller ports you won't get the quality and the quantities. So that's why we are forced into, make contracts with suppliers. I mean, we have to have reliable suppliers too. They need to be vetted, quality, payments. Today, particularly in the public, most of the big cruise lines are public companies. If something goes wrong, you got to be protected and do the right thing here.
Mhm.
So
What's feeding
partnerships
you?
are
What's
reliable.
feeding you the information to make those decisions, Dietmar? Like, is it historical data? Is it month-to-month
Yeah,
data?
mostly, of course, historical data, research data, right? I mean, let's say the process of hiring on or onboarding a new supplier, right? So it needs to be definitely checked for quality. We need to get some recommendations. Then, the financial side needs to be covered, today too, with all the security frauds and everything, payments, that's all a new world.
Mhm.
Phishing stuff. I mean, you need to be so alert along with on that side. I mean, that
Totally.
for me changed a lot today, and then I think along as I said, cyber security, for example, right? That is a big deal. And then yeah, and then the AI component, that is still pretty raw, but we use, I believe that hospitality, of course, if you look at robots, I mean, in car business or in manufacturing has been out there a long time. But then how do we do with the cruise business? And I do believe that it's still a business with people through people for people, and that's not going to change. I mean, you will have some tools there, but at the end of the day, it's emotional intelligence. EQ is going to be the differentiator.
Yeah, that aligns with what I hear from most hospitality operators. Is this balance between, this is largely a human industry.
Yeah,
This is what, and they feel protected because a big portion of what they're doing is still human and will remain human for a really long time. But they still understand that there's a shift happening. It's just unclear how this artificial intelligence tools now play as part of the game, as part of their operation.
yeah. Yeah, yeah,
How do you
we
feel?
don't know yet. Of course, the tools have, I mean, if you look back, I mean, I can look back 3, 4 decades. So the tools have just changed. Look at the phone, look at the TV sets, and look at the CDs. I mean, we have seen the change. It always has changed. So you're getting better, faster, quicker. So now it's the iPhone, and now it's so I mean, the enablers are getting better for sure.
Hmm.
But as you said, we humans are social creatures, so I think that we don't know yet. And psychology is also studying human behavior, so it's all about behavioral stuff. And yeah, but look at the special effects in movies or anything. We all have had a big progression. So I don't know how the hospitality. There will be definitely maybe some, like models which people don't have interaction with humans, but there's space for everybody to find your space out there on the market, and deliver a differentiated product. Stuff distinctions, and that's not going to go away either.
I like what you just said that enablers have changed. I
Yeah.
mean, the humans are still doing most of the work.
Yeah,
Enablers
but
have
human
changed.
side is not, the emotions are still there, right? So we still have to deal with that and the desires, and the needs and wants of human beings. They're not gonna change.
Hmm.
But the enablers and the tools, the toolbox is always changing.
Hmm. Speaking about the toolbox and enablers, and going back to what you said earlier about this, I'm just envisioning like this magic dashboard full of buttons and full of
Yeah.
metrics. What's what's giving you all that information? Is that something that at some point your team came up and said, you know what, we need to build this for us because it would save us a lot of time. It's gonna give us a lot of valuable information. Or is it that out of the box tool that you came across that you brought into your operation? How was the process of implementing that?
No, yeah, the concept was written before, the balanced scorecard. You can go back to Hilton and, and this, the university level stuff. I think, of course, each one has to design their own scorecard and scorecard, the balance score, what is relevant for you, right? You got to measure. And it's funny what you're saying is I envision the next scorecard in maybe 2 years, if we talk, it will be all AI. And the AI will automatically give us recommendations what we need to fix. They will give us the data and say, hey, look, here's red, yellow, green, and so they can be all automated, all the process and all the data. And that's I think that would be my own goal is that I'm going to have a total new, an automated scorecard.
Mhm.
And then it will automate already tell everybody, each department head, each function, core function, where they, what they need to focus on and do the necessary correction. But it still need to be done by human, in our case. But the
Absolutely.
ordering, there will be definitely improvements, in the consistency. And I think that's going to be a change. It's going to happen. I mean, we are not as consistent. The variables will be less. I
Mhm.
think AI will help us to have a more consistent operation, which at the end benefits everybody and at the end consumer, of course.
Totally. And
That's
then
the case.
from your desk right there where you're sitting now, I mean, you're currently have to look after, you said, multitude of ships, a myriad of them, and within each ship, different operations and different metrics, and then those break down into more metrics, I imagine. So right there where you're sitting, if you want to know how this specific one is doing, can you go in and tell right
Well,
now?
the idea is, when they met it, so I look at the top metrics, right? But then if that matrix is off, then the deep dive starts. Then you
Hmm.
go, then you sub-metric, 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 sub-metric. Then you go deep dive, we call it, right? Then you go in the deep dive and then you do the root cause analysis. So, but the pattern, one off. So it's about the pattern. If the pattern is going the wrong direction, the graph, then you start and then you go. Yeah, they're all available. So we have all of this, they all build up, right? But if if it's continue, is it the right track? But if the pattern is off, then you go deep. We
Got it.
call it the root cause analysis. I'm a stickler on that. We gotta figure out why.
Absolutely. And I mean, that applies to many industries, right? It's just
Yeah,
that
no, that's
hospitality has.
across the board. You gotta find, you gotta do problem solving, right? Problem solving is important too. It's never gonna change.
I agree. So, Dietmar, since since we have a little time left, let me ask you a couple of questions and then a
Yeah,
quick lightning round so that we can start wrapping up. But tell me, let me finish with this question for this particular set. What is one decision that you've made recently in the past year or the past 2 years that you wouldn't take back? Something that was very impactful, something that made a difference.
to take back or
No, that you wouldn't take back. A
oh,
decision
they
that you
wouldn't
thought
take
was
back.
great.
Yeah, it's still not take back is still having a choreography. You gotta have choreography, and people need to follow the choreography. Even you learn that, and then you have to confrontate people, not confrontate in a good way, but you gotta make course corrections. And if you don't do it, you make a mistake because it will destroy your choreography.
Okay, got it. That makes perfect sense. So, Dietmar, let me close with a very quick lightning round. I want to say three questions. Answer from the top of your head without overthinking. Whatever comes to mind first. Okay. So, first thing, what is the most overrated system in hospitality today?
ChatGPT. Well, overrated. Well, that's a good overrated. Okay, maybe yield management,
Okay, I'll have to look into that a little bit further, or ask you another time. What is the opposite? What is a system that you absolutely need?
inventory management.
Makes perfect sense. And then tell me this: what are great leaders in hospitality doing that average leaders are not doing?
Stay on course and measure things. I said, which don't get measured, don't get done. But also, training. Onboarding. Really give direction, coach to direction, support. That's it's like a coach. You gotta the human aspect, but we gotta give direction, choreography, then coach to choreography and evaluate to choreography.
Mhm. Great.
Stick to the
Well,
plan.
I agree. I also agree with that. Stick to the plan. So on that note, Dietmar, I'm gonna start wrapping up. So thank you so much for this great conversation. I think so many years of experience bring unique perspectives, and particularly because you're dealing with this operation that is so seafaring, right? And
Yes.
so it has all of these unique things. I mean, obviously, an hour is not enough for us to discuss about everything that we talk about. But again, thank you so much. Dietmar, where can our listeners follow you or what you're building or Eastern Anglo? Where should they check?
Anglo-Eastern, on our website, angloeastern.com, Alicia and Cruising and myself on LinkedIn, and we have a web page on LinkedIn and also on Facebook. So I'd be happy to, get in contact with anybody if they have any questions.
Thank you, Dietmar.
It was a
You heard
pleasure.
him. And thanks everybody for listening to Deep Current. If you are an operator dealing with any of the challenges that Dietmar and I discussed here today and what to keep that conversation going, feel free to find us at oceansco.com. Until then, I see you next time.